side, but I saw that beautiful vision, and then they continued with the installation of the deities.
I went to Jaipur, where the deities were being carved, and I supervised the carving of the deities, especially Prabhupada, because the carvers, they were working from photographs, often not very good. And so the man who was carving Prabhupada was having a really hard time. He was so frustrated because I kept trying to show him things and point out certain things on the photograph of Prabhupada, and they had to actually redo the whole carving at one point because some spot came up on Prabhupada's head. The sculptor finally said, "Now you do it," and he left. Because I watched him, so I kind of started learning a little bit. So I took over for a little while. Finally, the day came when all the deities were finished. And I brought the deities to Vrindavan on a train, and then a tanga, and then I took a rickshaw. This was like early in the morning, 3 a.m. or something. Just as I started entering the outskirts of Vrindavan, with all the deities in their crates, all the peacocks started crying. The hair on my head stood up from that sound. It was an amazing experience.
Nothing would stand in Prabhupada's way. This temple had to open as soon as possible. And there were many obstructions. You live in Vrindavan, you try and get things done. Everything's magnified 100 times. So if there's an obstruction, it's a big one. It's 100 times more obstructive than anywhere else in the world. But finally, through great endeavor, the day arrived.
M. Reddy was the governor of Uttar Pradesh. He comes from Andhra Pradesh originally, and Prabhupada had some contacts with him. He was also a life member. Prabhupada had very specifically invited him. That was very important to Srila Prabhupada, that the governor come for the opening. And he was establishing the credibility of our movement. And Prabhupada was such a gracious host that even though he was very sick at that time, Prabhupada somehow or other completely shed all of his illness and was acting in every way as if he had had absolutely no illness. And then later in the evening he was not well again. But Prabhupada would just completely ignore his physical condition.
The first artik was going to take place, and I was in the temple room, and the temple room was packed with people. And you know how it is in India, everyone's shoving each other one way. It was like an ocean of people just going from one direction to the other, and somehow or other I found myself right in the middle, and the curtains opened. I had no idea that Prabhupada was going to offer the first artik. And it was so wonderful just watching Srila Prabhupada as he was offering the articles. He was offering them with such love and simplicity.
When the curtains opened up, I was right in front of the Krishna Balaram altar. And I was so filled with ananda, just thinking of the triumph of Prabhupada and all that went into it. So just thinking of that, tears were just pouring out of my eyes. And I just wanted to stand there and watch Prabhupada in his moment of glory and relish it.
There was just one person between me and a clear view of Srila Prabhupada, and that was Tripurari Swami. So I was standing behind him, and I did everything I could think of. I held my camera in front of him. I tapped him on the shoulder. But he was just fixated on Prabhupada offering the arti.
Vishaka wanted to take a picture, and I was blocking the view. And so she's tapping me on the shoulder, which, you know, a lady wouldn't normally do that in ISKCON. And I was a sannyasi at the time, on top of it, a new sannyasi. And, you know, I was hearing her, but I wasn't listening.
He remained fixed in his position and, in fact, just ignored me. So I became a little bit desperate, and I put my mouth next to his ear because the kirtan was very loud. And I said loudly, "If you stand there, then you can see Srila Prabhupada offering the arti. But if you let me stand there, then the whole world will see Srila Prabhupada offering the arti.
So she got to me, and I stepped out of the way, and she took a very famous picture.
Jaya Radhe, Jaya Krishna, Jaya Vrindavan.
There's one part towards the end of the artic, he's offering the peacock fan. And as he looks out to offer it to the devotees, the smile on his face is unbelievable. It was like one who'd conquered the earth. He'd done it. He'd installed Krishna and Balaram in Vrindavan, and you could just read his face. It was full of bliss, full of happiness.
When Srila Prabhupada gave the lecture on the day of their installation, he gave the lecture in Hindi, so it would have been directed to the local guests. And he was begging forgiveness from all the personalities there for any offenses. And that struck me.
There were days of speeches by different godbrothers and learned men of Vrindavan. In particular, I remember there was one speech given by Nrsinga Vallabha Goswami, where Nrsinga Vallabha Goswami gave extensive scriptural evidence of how persons who were not members of the Vedic culture could be elevated to the platform of Brahmins and Vaishnavas. And Prabhupada was quite pleased with that speech. It was given in Hindi, but Prabhupada gave a summary afterwards.
And the other thing I'll never forget is the quantity of pink rose petals. And there was this like abundance of pink rose petals that you were actually kind of up to our ankles on the floor. It was so special. After Mangalarti, we were all making garlands for Krishna and Balaram. And one day there were lots of broken flowers left that couldn't be used for the garlands. So I had them all in this sheet that we'd been using on top of the floor to make them in. And I took them and I showered them over Srila Prabhupada from the balcony in the guest house. And then he gave this instruction that we shouldn't waste the flowers. Srila Prabhupada was very conscious, in India particularly, of wasting the money. He knew how to protect the flowers so they'd stay fresh for longer. He told us to wrap them in damp cloths and hang them in a cold place. He knew everything about flowers, it seemed to us. But also he didn't want us to waste. Even though, practically speaking, the flowers couldn't be used, he still wanted to teach us not to waste. And he considered that showering flowers on him like the demigods in the heavenly planets a waste of flowers. So I never did that again.